Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Preemie Health Talks. I'm Fabiana Bacchini, Executive Director of the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation and your host for this event. The Preemie Health Talks is the first of two international live series that CPBF is hosting 2020 in recognition of World Prematurity Day. Next month, we will have the Preemie Power Week, and all the information is already on our website and registration is free. These educational sessions are in collaboration with the International Family Integrated Care Committee, the Canadian Association of Neonatal Nurses, EFCNI, and GLANCE, the Global Alliance for Newborn Care. For those not familiar with CPBF, we are a charitable organization, and our mission is to support and educate Canadian families of premature babies every step of the way. We believe that through consistent information, access to helpful resources, and peer support inside and outside the NICU, we can empower families, ensuring they are ready to care for their babies. Consistent information is especially important today when we are facing a global pandemic. With the Preemie Health Talks and the Preemie Power Week, we intend to bring you the guidance of healthcare professionals and the knowledge gathered by researchers around the world, which are extremely valuable to help us care for families and their babies. I want to thank AbbVie for the unrestricted educational grant, Pampers, and our amazing team who really worked hard to make this event happen today. And today we have 3 sessions. The first one with Dr. Paige Church, followed by Rebecca Pierce and Dr. Rudena Banihani, right after Dr. Paige Church. And right now we're going to talk about BOOST, Building Opportunities for Optimal and Smooth Transition. Is a program from Sunnybrook Hospital in Toronto. This talk will describe an approach to transition to home for babies and their families in the NICU, with a focus on a developmental approach to this important transition. The objectives are to describe challenges for families in the NICU and how this can have implications long-term. Principles of development will be reviewed. The structure of a novel approach to transition will also be reviewed. With the declaration of pandemic by the World Health Organization in March 2020, many neonatal follow-up clinics shifted to virtual visits. This talk will review one approach to follow up in the time of COVID, with increase in attendance through video visits, video instructions, and enhanced communication with families. Dr. Paige Church is the director of Neonatal Follow-Up Program at the University of Toronto. She's also the medical director of the Neonatal Follow-Up Clinic at Sunnybrook Health Science Center and the Developmental Behavior Physician Lead in the Spina Bifida Clinic at Holland Bloorville Kids Rehabilitation Hospital. She's an assistant professor of pediatrics at the University of Toronto. Dr. Church, thank you so much for joining us here today. If you want to read her full bio, it's available on our website. I always love talking to Dr. Church. She has always incredible information to share with us and the families. Dr. Church, guide us through your presentation today. And at the end of her presentation, you have a moment for Q&A, and you can ask your questions and comments on the box below.
Great, thank you so much. So today is going to be, there's going to be half of the discussion today that I'm going to start with is going to be around the inpatient side of transition. And then my partner, Dr. Banihani, is going to take the clinic side and the back side, the outpatient side. So I'm going to focus a little bit more on the inpatient side. So we named this team BOOST, and we named it BOOST because we wanted something that was going to be positive. And that's what I'm going to talk about today, is this team of building opportunities for optimal and smooth transitions, and just a different way to look at transition to home. So I have to share my screen. Does that work?
It's perfect.
Okay, great. I have absolutely nothing to disclose, including that my slides aren't moving. Perfect. I have nothing to disclose. I have no money. I don't make any money. I don't get any grants. Not the best person here. Okay, so I don't know if anyone else, no one's been flying lately, but I used to love these ads when I would go to Pearson Airport and you'd be walking along the jetway preparing to leave or come back. And these ads were always all over the jetway from HSBC. And it was all about perspectives. Some people see a dog and they see a companion. Other people see a cute accessory. I see an alarm clock because I have a dog and my dog wakes me up every morning by 5:30 for a walk. But it's this idea of perspective, and we all look at things we all see the same thing, but we see it differently. So, and as the purpose of that is, as I designed this talk, and really as we designed the idea of Boost, we realized it was really an exercise around perspective. For a long time, when I did the dual training in neonatology and developmental peds, I really saw them as two very different streams of medicine. They were in different wings in the hospital. My staff physicians never mixed with each other. They never hung out together. And I saw them as more of a line, a linear progression from neonatology to developmental peds. And in neonatology, and I have this here for graphics, that's my partner who you'll be hearing from later, Dr. Benihani. We're very clinical, we're very medically based. It's all acute care, it's very intense. And then developmental peds, it's a different perspective. We play for a living. Children's work is play. We watch children play and we see how they're doing. What's unique is very rarely will you find a developmental pediatrician hanging around in the NICU. We just don't do that. But there are a couple of us who are dual trained and we do hang out in the ICU. And what we've realized is that perhaps our developmental peds training should be coming into the ICU sooner. So our objectives today are going to be that we're going to talk very briefly, and not because I don't think it's important, because I think it's very important, but briefly about the challenges of the families in the NICU and the implications these challenges have long term. I'm going to talk about the structure of Boost and also some of the challenges and some of the solutions that we found along the way. I love this quote from a paper by Dr. Heinen: "Distress is the companion of everyone in the NICU." And I think that so eloquently talks about, and Dr. Lantos talked about the emotional cauldron of the ICU. Like, it is a place where there's intensity and there's a lot of stress for families. And that stress and trauma is rooted in a lack of control, isolation, fatigue, exposure to constant judgment, fear, constant fear, and then the background of their own pre-existing challenges that you came into the ICU with that had nothing to do with your pregnancy, but just exist in the background of your day-to-day life. So it's a significant challenge. In terms of outcomes, one of the big fears for parents, or one of the big things that they think about, is what's going to happen if my baby survives? What will my baby's life be like? And what we do know is that a small number of children are going to go on to have significant challenges, significant functional challenges. And those include what has been traditionally measured with cerebral palsy, vision or hearing impairment, or cognitive impairment. Many more of the graduates, however, are going to have equally functionally challenging and lifelong challenges, but maybe not as significant to be deemed a disability. Those functional challenges include things like problems or difficulties with mental health. It may be with attention and regulation of attention. It might be with anxiety. Your learning skills or your actual ability to learn may be different. Language, both expressive and receptive, can be affected. Social communication, so how you communicate for social intent can be affected. Peer relationships as a result of all of this can be affected. And then motor coordination. While these children may not have cerebral palsy, they still may have significant challenges learning to button, learning to ride a bike. So still not insignificant problems. When we take this cluster of strengths and challenges and we look at it in developmental peds, we call these behavioral phenotypes. And what that describes is that it's a cluster of strengths and challenges for children in different domains of development, but the common link is that there's some common biological link. So it might be a genetic link, like trisomy 21, so something where there's clearly a genetic reason for why the children present the way they do. And in the land of the premature infants, it's more of a neurologic or a neurodevelopmental link, and it's the commonality with which their brains develop in the ICU in this different environment than they were intended to have. So in my land of neonatology, I often sort of live here, and these are brain MRIs. This is a brain MRI of a 32-week baby at term. This is from Dr. Inder's work. And this is a brain MRI of a 23-week baby at term. And what you can see is that the brain volume, because this is the skull, the brain volume is just less robust. And I know Dr. Miller has done a nice talk where he showed beautiful slides of MRIs. But this is what we would sort of say is the nature. This is what, and I don't know if these are going to work. Yep, there we go. This is what I would say is the organic etiology for that behavioral phenotype. It is that the brains are developing differently. There's more stress on how the brain develops, and it's not necessarily it can be less robust than babies who are left to be in utero. But what we often don't pay attention to in neonatology, and I think is actually equally important, is what happens to these people, the parents. They are in that emotional cauldron for months, and it affects who they are as people and how they parent. And that is the nurture part. In developmental peds, we acknowledge that this matters, but we actually think that you change this through this. So my background in developmental peds has taught me over the years, I'm a slow learner, that nurture can change nature and we can change how nature presents. And that's, that's where we went. So anyone who knows me knows I love the New Yorker. I realized it's really about perspective. My neonatal colleagues see the MRI, and I do too, but I also see how it changes parents and how parents are affected, and that matters as well. And so really it's about, you know, this guy's on an island and he's all by himself and he thinks he's been saved because there's a boat. And this guy on the boat is all by himself and he thinks he's been saved because he's found land. It's all perspective. We have to look at it sort of from all sides to be a little bit more perhaps holistic. So then I went sort of down this rabbit hole of exploring this further about how we see transition to home in neonatology and how developmental peds sees transition to home, and they're actually very different. So this is from a textbook. This is from like standard textbook or guidelines. So in neonatology, sort of the criteria for home, make sure that they understand the common medical conditions that their child has, make sure they know about their medicines, make sure they know how to mix the formula, make sure that the follow-up appointments have been booked and that community services are incorporated or ready to go. And then at the end, it had a note, make sure parents feel confident. Okay. But when you look at developmental peds, which frankly, I did a whole fellowship and I took the boards, I never really looked at the chapter on neonatology because I thought it was a waste of time because they're never in there. But when I read it, it actually is so rich with detail that I had missed. You know, they describe these children as premature, or these parents as premature parents. Parents become parents before they were expecting to. And they talk about being careful about intellectualization. So the tendency for parents under stress to want to have the information and want to understand it, want to have all the data, and that this can get in the way of falling in love with who this baby is in front of you. The other thing I thought was really rich in this chapter is they warned around attachment competition. So you have great primary nurses who can feed the baby doesn't spell when they're with them, and that feels really good, but they're not the ones who are going to take this baby home. So we need to be careful that the staff taking care of the baby don't become so attached to the baby that they can't let go. And this is all like beautifully worded in this chapter. They also acknowledge that a lack of time alone with an infant is a stressor independent of all of the medical stuff. So having that constant surveillance as a parent is stressful. And they recommend that there's a period where we allow the parents to discover their infant, recognizing that it means we are going to have to step back from our excellent medical care to let them discover and have a safe place to make maybe some mistakes, but probably not many. And that this sense of competency, when you allow this to happen, is what really lets attachment happen in a much more healthy way. So very different approaches to discharge. Like they don't even talk about, do you have your medicine? Like they just sort of presume that that stuff is automatic. And it's with this in mind that we went back to this idea of this spaghetti diagram that Kate Robson and Virginia McLaughlin did. And we started to look at what do we think with our developmental peds hat, we can start to tackle in the ICU while they're still in the ICU, but change as they get ready to go home. And the things we tried to focus on was this exposure to shame, this idea of making sure that we were very culturally sensitive, making sure we recognized that parents felt like they were on stage and that that would be a stressor, being aware of other siblings. How do we factor them in developmentally? Identity crisis. Who are these people and are they who they thought they were going to be? And that can be really frightening. The idea of this medicalized environment and still being surrounded by trauma, and the lack of consistency among providers. So that's a big one, and it becomes more and more stressful as the acuity goes away. And the sense of a loss of role. As a mother, you know, you're supposed to be feeding your baby, but you're not feeding your baby because it's being done by a gavage, and then it's being done by an expert, and you're not the expert. And we tried to kind of get rid of all of those things and to change the environment as much as we could and give back the control to the parents who are taking these babies home. Sorry, my hand's still, there we go. So from that, and from years of sort of thinking about this and going back and forth and over it, we developed this team called Boost. And what we developed for criteria was that we thought we should start small and simple, small, ironically, and also small number scale wise. So we started with the babies that were under 25 weeks or the babies who had had an unexpected medical course. They might have been more mature, but they were more medically involved than we would have expected. And what we did is we set rounds at only twice a week, which is unusual. But that let us have time for parents' plans, to have time to see them evolve. If we rounded too frequently and the changes weren't happening, we were worried that we would start to have people want to make changes, and we really wanted to let it be parent-driven. And so it is parent-driven. And we'll talk about this in a second, but I hope you can see that our ICU environment is a little different. It's out in gardens, sitting on benches, not sitting in an ICU surrounded by equipment. So our team consists obviously of the parents and the family members. That's gotten a little tricky with COVID, but we're back to having 2 parent members in. We have a medical team, and we committed to only 2 physicians, and we have 1 other physician as an emergency who cover the whole year. So that gets rid of some of that lack of consistency, because you only have 2 physicians in the team. So we really try to be the consistent presence. We have nursing at the bedside, primaries if we can have them, that's great. Team leaders and the discharge planners, the nurse practitioner, and particularly if they're a primary, that's really helpful. We have therapeutic presence, plus or minus a respiratory therapist if the baby has needs, dietitian support, pharmacy support, and social work support. So it's a big team. There we go. And what Kate said is we really should have named it BOOM, because we really tried to push away from the constant NICU need for control. And I am a neonatologist, so I own that I like to have control. And we really demanded that parents be treated as equal team members with the same input and the same value to that input. And we can talk about that in a few seconds when I talk about some of the pitfalls. I am a big believer that parents have names, and I try very hard to use their first names as a way to address them, so that it becomes more of a relationship and not so much of a dismissive mom-dad. And I also, when we were setting this up and we were talking about it as a team, when I was talking about it with my colleagues, I said, I don't want to be held to weight gain, and I don't want to be held to an earlier discharge, because those are not my developmental goals. My developmental goals are around the parents, not around the baby getting out quicker. So again, you can see outside, this is Rita, who I adore. Poor Rita went out for this was our first walk, our pilot sentinel walk outside on a day where it was about 35 degrees Celsius. And she was in a yellow gown, which does not breathe, and blue gloves. And this mother, because this was her first time outside, did not want to go back in. So poor Rita was out there for about an hour and she was dying. So the one that we needed to be worried about was poor Rita, not the baby. So our goals of Boost are really to establish parents as the primary, and I don't even like care provider, but parents as the primary people taking care of their child. And we really focus on building their capacity, developing their ability to advocate, increasing their time alone and their independence, which is the purpose of these. So we let them go outside and walk the grounds. If they don't feel comfortable stepping out of the building, how on God's green earth are they going to leave the hospital and feel comfortable? So this is an exercise in building that muscle up and giving them time alone. Because this was the first walk, Rita ever so kindly went, but now parents are going alone and doing it on their own. We wanted to give them a safe space to explore their parenting and make decisions. And that included things like disagreeing with recommendations and having a chance to not do what we say. You know, it wasn't things like antibiotics, yes, no. If we thought there was an infection, we were treating it. But it was things like, I don't like the additives. I don't think my baby's stomach is tolerating them well. I want to do a trial without them. I review the literature on what the additive literature is, and I provide that, and then they make a very educated decision about what they want. And we also had a goal of establishing strong relationships with the post-discharge team while in the ICU, so that the NICU follow-up team was getting to know them well before they even left. Oops. Sorry. So that's Matthew. What do rounds look like? Well, in the words of Kate, we talked about evidence-based parenting. So we provide the medical evidence, the science behind our recommendations and our decisions, and then parents apply their values, their goals, their interests, and they make decisions with what we've provided. But it isn't strictly medical care, because I just believe parents need to start making their own decisions. But key to that ability is that there's full-time access to healthcare. So my email, I joke around, it's on the bathroom wall, it's everywhere. I believe in being accessible to parents because I believe that that opens the door to healthcare, and healthcare should be accessible. So parents have my email access and send me photos, ask me questions, and I sort of remind them about when I'm available, when I'm not, but it's worked quite well. So that's a quick overview of Boost. It didn't go perfectly smoothly, and it's not to say that introducing developmental peds into an ICU setting was easy. We ran into a lot of bumps, and it was a hard first year. I would say it added a lot of wrinkles to my face. You know, some of the concerns raised by the team were things like decisions weren't always evidence-based, and this was around the idea of, you know, additives, yes, no, and taking them out, and the baby's growth leveling off. But my point back to them was, if we don't give them a place to do it here, parents will do it somewhere else, and they should. They have their own opinions. So what we tried to do is create a safe place for parents to do evidence-based parenting, a place where mistakes were okay because they're just starting to get their feet wet with how to take care of this baby, and where they felt that they could ask questions and they could have an open relationship, and their concerns weren't being invalidated by my just saying, well, there's no evidence. Well, there's no evidence. There's no evidence for a lot of the stuff we do. And as parents, I would not appreciate someone telling me what I can and cannot do. So parent-led decisions, I've really tried to put back on them so that there's a capacity building. There was concerns around access to the physician, primarily me, was interfering with relationships that were established by other team members. And I acknowledge that. I mean, I think that that's a serious concern, but my point to anyone with that concern was, when these individuals go home, the relationship with me will be ongoing, whereas the relationship with the NICU will go away. And so I wanted that relationship to grow and to develop, and it is natural that the NICU relationships would start to wither because that's healthy. And so while it may be painful, it is important. We also developed an email policy so parents knew when I was available and when I wasn't. And we also developed a way to bypass some of the regulatory colleges and just provide access to the email information, because some different colleges aren't allowed to email directly. So I would just forward it on, and then they were aware of the same information. There was also a big concern around safety, like humongous. Like I adore the people who raise the questions around safety because it's important. But one woman in particular who is a dear friend came in and she was like, I think I just saw her a kilometer down the road with her baby. And I was like, that's awesome. That's great. So the babies go out with a portable monitor, and they have, and we have worked out some safety algorithms to make it a little bit more safe. But I haven't had a parent yet be overly aggressive or take risks that I wouldn't approve of. They wander, and they've had a lovely time. I'll tell you, we had to shut it down during COVID briefly. And we had one mother who recently graduated from here, and she was our first mother back out because she kept asking and asking and asking. And I kept going back to infection control and saying, how do we do this? And we found a route where she didn't see anybody, and we got her out the door. And it was raining. And I said, do you really want to go outside? It's raining. And she was so bent on going that she said, I don't care. I want her to smell the fresh air. And as we stepped outside, I looked at her and she was crying. So the act of this simple thing of just taking your baby for a walk is profound. And it gives them a space to develop their own capacity. Then what happened before COVID, we haven't had it start back up, but one mother was texting like 3 mothers in the unit, and they were all meeting outside of the ICU and going for walks together like a little gaggle of women. So it's so normal and so beautiful. And when we found out, I was like, oh my God, send me photos. You know, the hospital got a little wobbly with that and got a little nervous, but it's normal. This is what we want them to do. And as soon as COVID is over, I'm having them go right back at it because it was such a great little group of women that did this and supported each other. There was also a concern around discharges being too early, which was not the goal. So it's interesting that that was sort of an observed effect, and that we weren't using the traditional measures of feeding readiness. So we weren't absolutely making sure that they could feed consistently for 4 days or 3 days and that they had to gain weight every day. I sort of threw that out. And what we went with was our parents feeling ready. I didn't send them home if they're not gaining any weight, but if they were gaining a little bit of weight or holding their own and parents said, I am so ready, we let them go. And I'm letting them go because it's not like I'm never going to see them again. We're seeing them within 48 hours of discharge by Zoom so that we can follow up and make sure they are safe. And we're talking to the outpatient team to make sure they're safe. So that's a little glimpse into Boost. These are some quick photos. I will tell you, this photo is about 1 kilometer from the hospital. So she was probably one of our more free range mamas, very confident. She was incredibly confident. And when she left, she never looked back. She was so ready to go and she was so confident. And then this Peggy is the mom who got this group going. And so Peggy would text them all and they'd all go up and they'd all get together because this was in the winter and they'd all go up to a quieter floor and they'd go for a group walks. And so Peggy shared this photo because I just thought it was so great. Anyway, so that is a quick visit into Boost. And what I hope you can see is that transition is uncomfortable for families, but what we experienced was transition in our care was uncomfortable for us. And that I think that discomfort is a healthy way to grow. And I think new perspectives sometimes can make care richer, not necessarily less safe or less successful. So thank you very much. And I look forward to having a discussion.
Wow, thank you, Paige. You always have so much food for thought, and I hope this is only not for thought, but really to be applicable in many NICUs. This is incredible. My first question to you is, this is a culture shift, right? Because this is way more than another pilot, and then let's see how it goes, and then you have the results, and then you publish. This is a whole change in the thinking of the NICU. How do we change that?
It was painful. It was really, 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 really painful. I had a year where I didn't have a lot of eye contact from a lot of different colleagues because they just were so, I think, you know, it was unsettling. It was nerve-wracking. It was frightening. I had incredible support from the nurses and the nurse practitioners and my colleagues. So I was lucky, but, you know, it took a lot of bugging people to make things happen and get things done. And I'm very lucky that the hospital has been so willing to think outside the box. We're now just starting to peel apart the components of Boost and start to look at them now that we've sort of piloted it and we've proven that it can be done and it's feasible. So hopefully we'll have data in the next year or so. But anecdotally, it's been great. And we haven't found families to be, we had one readmission in 3 years. So, and that was a couple weeks after discharge. So it wasn't necessarily medical.
So from the families that you worked with, and then you see them later in the community because you're still in touch with them, how do they feel about this? Because I'm assuming when you're in the NICU, you don't know anything different. You think this is how it is. But then you can see them in the community, how more empowered or able to advocate for their children. What have you seen?
I found that the relationship, if nothing else, the relationship with me, because I'm the one in clinic, and the families is stronger and it's less formal, which I want. It's more agreeable, more accessible. Like I don't feel like families are as uncomfortable emailing me with questions because they've already been doing it. And they've gotten to know me. It's funny because I think that they're talking to each other in the ICU because I find out through the nurses that parents are asking, when can they go on Boost? What do I need to do to get on that team? So I think parents are enjoying it and they enjoy the greater latitude for the decision making. So the feedback I'm hearing is that it's positive and that that it's certainly making them feel more comfortable with the care of their babies. I think the other thing, and this was something that Kate Robson taught me, is you know, traditionally, if I were just operating as my neonatologist and a family said, I want to do X, Y, or Z, I want to take additives out of my baby's breast milk because I think it makes my baby's tummy disrupted and they're not feeding. You know, my neonatology answer would be like, well, no, because the evidence says blah, blah, blah. It's better for you to have them. It's better for growth, better for brain development. But when I reviewed all of those things, and then I had a mother push back on me and she said, yes, but my baby doesn't sleep. And isn't that important for growth and development? And I was sort of like, well, that's a good point. So she said, I want to do a trial. I want to do a trial where I do 72 hours of no additives. You know, we peeled the dietitian off the floor, but we did it. And the mother had the answer she was looking for at the end of that trial. And then she made the decision about what to do next. And Kate's point was, if we don't do that in the hospital, they're going to do it when they go home. So why not create an open environment where you can explore your ideas and not have them dismissed as not evidence-based, but instead provide the evidence and then have them provide their values and their impression of the evidence for evidence-basbased parenting, and then we make a decision. So people are getting used to it. I think it's getting better.
So in terms of logistics, when the parents actually are signing up for boosts, or they can actually go out for a walk outside the walls of the unit, and is it closer to discharge, or what is the timeline?
So in general, and it's not always this way, but in general, they need to be off of mechanical ventilation. So not using CPAP and not having central lines and things like that. So generally that can be anywhere from around 34 weeks to 38 weeks, depending on the gestation of the baby to start. We have had, like I can count on one hand, a couple of kids on CPAP that were really, really mature and were quite involved. So we have done it, but generally they were post-term. So the earliest we enroll is probably around 34 weeks, and it can be anytime after that. And most of our kids are on our service for a month. Some come and go really quickly, and that's just unexpected. Some stay longer, but our average is about a month to 6 weeks with each family. And we run a service of about 8 to 10 babies.
At a time.
Yeah.
So Paige, so you provide education, you inform parents, you want parents to become advocates, empowered, and knowledgeable about their child's condition. How do we include parents, for instance, who don't speak English or have English as a second language, but a limited English? Do we involve those parents, or do they have interpreters? How can we make it accessible for everyone?
So yeah, we certainly don't use language as the barrier to enrollment. It does make it trickier. It's harder to establish relationships. I don't speak that much French, and I don't speak any other languages, so that's not easy. But we'll either have an interpreter or we have staff members that can interpret. My partner, who's one of the doctors for Boost, she speaks Arabic, so that can be really helpful if it's a family that speaks Arabic. So we try to find an advocate for the family or a family member who can provide phone interpretation. Sometimes we hear that if families can't be present, we wouldn't put them on Boost, but my answer back is, well, we just find a creative way to get the parents timing better. Like if they're working, do they want to meet after? Do they want to email updates? Do they want to email me questions? Like that doesn't preclude them from joining. So I try to be as open to whoever wants it is welcome to be on the service. But I do find language is probably my hardest barrier, just because I can't do it easily.
So we have 2 comments here. Just want to say that Boost is amazing. Dr. Church really helped us feel confident going home after a turbulent NICU journey. And another comment from another parent: this is amazing. We need more programs like this. I don't know if we'll ever see any of the NICU professionals again. I'm just waiting for a letter in the mail at 8 months discharge with further instruction. I'm lucky to have a good family doctor. So yes, I think families get very excited about this. But Paige, my question, I have another question, because now it's COVID, and then there is a parent limitation time in NICUs. In Canada now, most of hospitals are having 2 parents back, but a lot of hospitals around the world, parents still don't have a full access, especially now the second wave. And you talk about nurture. How do we keep that going at this time? Because it's very challenging for everyone. Yeah,
I think COVID, March, April, and May were probably the darkest time for me with how I felt parents left the ICU. I felt like we didn't accomplish even close to what we set out to do because we were so restrictive on how accessed they could be. That was really, really, really hard. What we're trying to do now is our hospital has let 2 families back in, but that hasn't been without a lot of nudging from our director of operations, our medical director, me bugging them. So some of it takes advocacy on our side to drive the hospitals to recognize that 1 parent versus 2 is the same infectious package. Just like I'm an infectious package with my husband. And I think the other thing is we need to be creative. You know, COVID, and you're going to hear about this with Dr. Benahani, we have made some changes to our outpatient side that have made me happier and more excited about our care, and we're going to continue those. So an example is when children go home from Boost, I discharge them on, say, a Monday. By Thursday, they're doing a Zoom visit with me. And normally I would have hemmed and hawed about that because I wouldn't want to make them come back to the hospital, especially if they lived at a distance, because that would have tired the baby out. So these Zoom visits have been great because I can see the baby, I can go over everything with mom, we check in, I kind of get a little glimpse around the house, which is helpful. I get to see where they live. So I found it, you know, I used to do home visits all the time and they got too time consuming. Zoom is like a great alternative. So if we can continue that, and even with our walks right now, thank God the hospital is still letting them happen, but I am very worried that that's going to get taken away in the not too distant future. You know, we need to do evidence. That's what I'm going after now, is I'm going to get evidence that there has to be continued. We wouldn't take away endotracheal tubes because of COVID, because we don't have enough, because there's some excuse. If we can drive home that these care measures are as important and have evidence, they shouldn't take those away either.
Absolutely. So we're coming to an end, but I have one more question. How do you see this unfolding in the future and becoming sustainable?
Two ways. One is that I hope more young trainees do the dual fellowship. You know, when I signed up to do it with the American board, there had been people ahead of me that had done one or the other and then done them separately, but to do them together was novel. And now that there's more and more people doing it, I think that will drive some of these changes. And I think the other way is that if we can yield the evidence and transfer that evidence as a general rule, then we'll see NICU start to change. And that's my hope, and that's our next step.
Okay, and one last message for parents transitioning to home right now.
Oh boy, it's exciting, it's frightening, but my guess is you are 10 times readier to go than you may believe, and your baby will do always best when they are with you. There is no one better to care for that baby than the parents, period. Absolutely. So it's a good jump.
Thank you, Dr. Paige Church. So amazing talking to you always. I'm so grateful for your time. I know you're in service, so thank you so much for taking the time to share your message with our community today.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for joining us here today. And I want to thank AbbVie and Pampers for the ongoing support. And I'm very excited to announce that from November 1st in honor of Prematurity Awareness Month, Pampers will donate one extra diaper to Canadian ICUs via CPBF for every hashtag on social media, Pampers for Preemie. So stay tuned in our social media channels. Also, CPBF is a registered charity, and 100% of all donations received during this week will go to our educational programs for families. To donate, please go to CanadianPremature.org. It takes only 3 minutes of your time, and will have a huge impact on the families that we serve.